Welcome back to Joe Stunner Boxing. A little bit of Joe Stunner Boxing, what do they call it? Not paraphernalia, merchandise, right? It's Gareth A. Davies. There he is, my hero. God bless him, Gareth. We've got to have him on the channel more, you know. Anyway. Right, let's talk about Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn because let me take you back 12 years, roughly. When Frank had left Sky, he'd founded BoxNation. They showed some pretty decent domestic level cards. They did have some very good cards that were, foreign. He, brought them in, like GGG, I think, was on one of them. And so, they were what Frank was trying to do was basically create an exclusive boxing channel, a channel just for boxing. And that, when I was a kid would have been, I'd died and gone to heaven. But unfortunately for Frank, I think he left it maybe 10 years too late because we were already on the cusp of streaming, right? And Frank kind of, it was a bit late for the party, really. And also he didn't have a lot of money. I think Raynham Steel sponsored it for a while. And then I believe the CEO of Raynham Steel, the founder of it, who was worth many, many millions, passed away. So Frank, basically, if you went over and looked at Company House, you would see Frank Warren, Queensbury, BoxNation. It was all doing very, very poorly, losing money hand over fist, and they were sort of breaking even. And Frank himself has said in interviews, I really wasn't sure about this. It was nip and tuck. Now, contrast this with Eddie Hearn, who picked up an exclusive deal with Sky and then absolutely ran riot with it, made it just kind of resurrected boxing. I mean, obviously he had Sky's money and his dad's money, Matchroom money. But there's no doubt he put on some fantastic stuff on Sky, domestic level, conquered the domestic market, completely dwarfed Frank and Queensbury and BoxNation. He was flying, absolutely flying. And Frank, he was walking on foot. But at the time this bugged Frank, he hated Hearn, and for years he was slagging Hearn off and insulting him, and Hearn, of course, why insult him back? He was just taking a piss, really, because he was flying. He was absolutely, if he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, he turned it into a gold spoon. That's the old cliche. And there was an interview actually that Frank gave with, I think it was IFLTV, where he was clearly in a bad mood. And he said something along the lines of, I saw off his father, meaning Eddie Hearn, and I'll see him off as well. I'll drive him out. I drove the old man out of boxing. I'll drive Eddie Hearn out of boxing. And then Barry Hearn made a sort of retort to that. I think it was, again, via IFLTV, an interview. He said, the only way you'll be driving Eddie anywhere is if he hires you as a chauffeur, or words to that effect. And Frank, I believe, spoke to IFLTV and said, I want that taken down, and they did it. All right. Now, shortly afterwards, Kugan Cassius and James Helder, who was the co-founder of IFLTV, they got a gig on BoxNation, Cassius and Helder, and they were like a little magazine show. So they made up with Frank, and Cassius would interview Frank an awful lot, and they seemed to be getting on okay. But it wasn't like Kugan Cassius with Eddie. You got the feeling they were mates because they're close in age, and Frank is an older man, and it was okay. But anyway, the point is that Frank was on his arse, Eddie up with the angels in the heavens. Fast forward 12 years, okay, roughly 12 years to 2024. If ever there was a resurrection to compare with Daniel Dubois over the last 13 months, it's that of Frank Warren, because as soon as he got in with Turkey Al Sheikh, and Frank is Turkey's guy, not Eddie. Eddie's friendly, he's got good business relationship, but Frank was the one. He actually said with the Fury and Ngannou fight, this is a game changer. And a lot of us, myself included, thought, is he talking about the heavyweight division? What are you talking about? No. He. If you take it that he was talking about boxing, he was absolutely right. And in the last, however many months, 8 months, 9 months, whatever it's been, 6 months, Frank and Queensbury have obliterated Hearn and Matchroom 5-0 in the 5 versus 5, 5-0. And now at the weekend, Daniel Dubois, a Queensberry fighter, someone who Frank and Queensberry nurtured as I think I'm right in saying they sponsored him before he was turned professional. And when he did turn professional, they signed him. And they've stood by him through 2 very bad defeats. They've got him opportunities. Frank Warren knows fighters. He knows how to bring them on. He knows how to bring them along, match them right. I do feel it was a calculated gamble that went wrong with Joyce. At the time, I was thinking that's a bit early for Daniel. Although I did think he'd probably come through it, but he didn't, of course. He had the busted eye socket. But the point is that Frank has invested money in Daniel, helped him to where he's at, and now, look, they're reaping the rewards. Eddie Hearn, Joshua, absolutely obliterated. Eddie Hearn, his ego must be around the ankles now. So Matchroom, the resurrection of Matchroom has resulted in at least the domestic destruction of, and to some degree the international destruction, if you look at the 5 versus 5 of Matchroom and Eddie. It's now up to Eddie to show some of the mettle that Frank showed, okay? Because bear in mind, Frank Warren, I know he's in his 70s, he comes from humble means. He comes from a working class background in which perhaps the Warrens, this is before my time, Frank's about 15 years older than me, but I do remember going to some of his very early shows in leisure centres and all that sort of thing and enjoying them. But his background, Lenny McLean, I think, was his cousin, his second cousin or something like that. And there may not have, things in the old days may not have been done entirely as they should have been, if you take my meaning. And Frank comes from a rough and tumble background. He's a man-made multimillionaire. He's also been bankrupted. He got sued by Don King. I think he lost about 9, 10, 11 million quid or something. He's been shot, lost part of his lung. And yet he keeps going, because he has that innate toughness that I think you can, I wouldn't say you can only get it from a working class, humble background, but Christ, it helps. If you have that natural innate toughness, there are very few better places to forge it than in a working class background where you have to wheel and deal. There ain't a lot of money around. You've got to go out there and make your money, especially back in the day, Now, you contrast this with Eddie, who, as I say, look, Eddie Hearn is a terrific promoter. Okay, regardless, I don't particularly like either of these guys. I've never met either of them, but I met Frank very briefly once. Very briefly. I said hello to him, and that was about it. Are you here for the show? Yeah, I'll enjoy it. That was it. The sum total of my meeting with Frank. I've never met Eddie Hearn, ever. When I say I met Frank, that was fucking 40 years ago, whatever. Anyway, the point I'm making is that Eddie comes from money, okay? His father, who is, I think, a little bit older than Frank, is another working class, self-made millionaire, okay? Eddie has maximised his opportunities, no doubt, and the guy works really hard, and he's put on some fantastic shows, absolutely brilliant shows, and he's continuing to do so, So this is not about saying Eddie Hearn is a bad promoter. This is about saying that Eddie Hearn has now got to show that he's not a soft ass when it comes to the crunch. That when his back's against the wall, he can, and he's losing rounds, to use the obvious boxing analogy, he can get his second wind and come again and show the sort of toughness that Frank Warren has got. People wrote Frank off. Oh, yeah, yesterday's news, you used chip paper, throw him in the bin. Look where he is now. The guy knows boxing. The guy wheels and deals. He's an excellent businessman. He might not be fashionable, but as Oscar Wilde said, fashion is a form of ugliness so bad that we feel compelled to change it every 6 months. Frank's not fashionable. He's the real deal. There's substance there. And Eddie has substance too. No doubt about that at all. But as someone who had that silver spoon thing going on, and drives around in a Rolls Royce and does all the, probably has a lovely house and blah, 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 all this sort of stuff. If he wants to carry on in boxing, if he really is a stayer, someone who doesn't just lead from if he isn't just a front runner, if he's someone who can soak up punishment and come back, now is the time to prove it. Now, a lot of people have said, Eddie Hearn's finished. Absolute rubbish. Okay, absolute rubbish. Look, Eddie Hearn still has his contract with DAZN. It hasn't been a good year for him. in terms of, the 5 versus 5, Joshua's been knocked out, a few other things have happened. But don't write the guy off. He's still got his DAZN contract. He'll probably have that. I can't see them getting rid of him. Why would they get rid of him? And if you look internationally, Eddie is still ahead of Frank. DAZN is still ahead of Queensberry. But without a shadow of a doubt, Eddie has lost the domestic scene. In fact, it's been lost to him for a couple of years now. Frank's definitely progressed. But Frank is the type of person, he'll concentrate on what he knows. Eddie is the type of person who'll stick branches out. I'll do shows in Mexico, I'll do one in Australia, and that's great. I'm not saying one's right and one's wrong. But domestically, you give Frank some tools to work with, he'll deal with it. It's fine. He'll make the most of it. He's like one of those people who, you look in the fridge and there's only a few odds and ends left, but somehow they make up a dish. Eddie is definitely right. I'm on this, and this. And if he gets it, he puts on a great show. But from the grassroots up, he's got to. And he has built some fighters as well. He hasn't done too badly. But anyway. This is the tale between Queensberry and Matchroom at the moment. It is, of course, roller coaster. Up and down, up and down, up and down. This is a down for Eddie and an up for Frank. Let's see how it goes. What do you think? Comments below as always. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button. Let me know your opinion on Frank versus Eddie, Queensberry versus Matchroom. Whatever you've got to say, put it in the comments. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.